Welcome back, APUSH students. Today is chapter 13 of the American Pageant, titled The Rise of Mass Democracy. If you don't know the American Pageant, it's fine because the content is still going to be the same. I'm going to be going over all the key terms and notes for this chapter that helped me get a 5, so I encourage you to take notes along as well. So first off is mass democracy, institution of democracy in a large country, which is obviously the United States. It provides many challenges on the basis of how a large area with many people can value each citizen's ideas and policies. So basically, how can you make sure that everybody is represented when a country is so large and so diverse? Participatory democracy, type of democracy favoring people participation. It is evident in the separation of powers between federal and lower levels, which encourages more participation among citizens. So giving those local and state governments more power ultimately gives the citizens more power because the citizens are more in tune and in control of their smaller size governments. The Democratic Party, one of the two dominant political parties of the time, in combination with the opposing Whig Party, their competition ensured checks and balances of power between the two. So having two opposing parties make sure that one group's ideals doesn't become too powerful so that they have to compromise, and that decreases radicalization. Corrupt bargain, suspected deal between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. It caused an outcry against elitism, corruption, and anti-democratic action, and ensured that the people would have more power over the election of their leaders. So basically what happened was there was a sort of tie in the presidential election, and it went to the legislative body to decide on who was to become president. And Henry Clay was one of the people running for president. So what happened was he dropped out so that he would lead the vote for John Quincy Adams, and then John Quincy Adams gave Henry Clay vice president, or not vice president. It was the head of the State Department is what Henry Clay was appointed to. So essentially, this caused a lot of outrage over these kind of behind the doors deals, and it created more policies that increased democracy for the people. John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, the 6th president. He was smart, but not a successful president. He was not able to adapt to the new wave of more democracy. He was also not able to adapt to the popularity of sectionalism over nationalism. So he struggled a lot to deal with those issues, and that ultimately made him not a very effective president. Andrew Jackson, the 7th U.S. president after John Quincy Adams. He was somebody who fought for the common man against aristocrats. He was an avid Democratic Republican who stood up for states' rights and people's rights against the federal government, symbolized political power shifting westward. So he led a huge campaign, grassroots campaign from those people out west, and he was a very controversial president. This period was literally called the Jacksonian era because of how much influence he had over everything. A lot of things bad, a lot of things good. The spoils system, rewarding political allies with government positions. The spoils system contributed to the two-party system as people were more loyal to their party over policy. People became more tightly aligned to one side over the other. So people would become super loyal to their party leaders in order for them to get jobs. So they were so blinded by who their leaders were that they didn't really care what their policies were as long as they got a job that they could make money off of. Alexis de Tocqueville, European man who investigated American society. His writings were very influential and insightful. He revealed the details of American society and its democracy. He also outlined the potential bad fates of democracy and how aspects of America mitigated those threats. Tariff of abominations, large tariffs protecting northern manufacturers. The act of the government only protected the North and Midwest, allowing their manufacturing societies to prosper, while the South had to sell their agricultural products in markets unprotected by tariffs. The South felt as if the federal government was preferring the North, so they nullified it. So the federal government passed tariffs to limit foreign goods from entering the North, so the northern manufacturers could succeed, but the South were like, we don't produce our goods, we have to buy our goods. So now the North's goods that the South needed to purchase to survive were becoming super expensive because there was no price competition, and the South basically got mad at the federal government. So they said, you know what, we're nullifying that bill. John C. Calhoun, vice president of John Quincy Adams. He secretly wrote the South Carolina Exposition against the federal government and for states' rights and abolitionism while he was currently in office as a vice president. So even when he was the vice president, he was nullifying those tariffs, those federal government laws from within the VP office, which was pretty crazy. The South Carolina Exposition, pamphlet written against the tariff abominations, written by John C. Calhoun. By denouncing the tariffs, it promoted the principle of nullification, which is that the states can reject federal laws that they don't find constitutional. It encouraged states to void federal laws within their states. Between the lines, it revealed the South's worries not only with the tariffs, but also the government's eventual crackdown on slavery. So this nullification principle that the South was trying to establish was actually a protection that they envisioned in the future that they would need when the government started to crack down on slavery. Nullification crisis, conflict between South Carolina and the federal government over nullification. South Carolina's nullification action showed disloyalty and disunity. Andrew Jackson denounced nullification and dispatched troops to South Carolina. Their conflict showed early signs of what could become a civil war decades later. So you can see the South and the federal government, located largely in the North, were really starting to fight around the mid-19th century. Compromise tariff of 1833, compromise between federal and the South over tariffs. It eased the tensions of the nullification crisis because the compromise favored the South. It got rid of the threat of Andrew Jackson needing to use military force against South Carolina, but you should know that this really didn't solve much. These tensions were becoming closer and closer to unsolvable. Force Bill, act that allowed the federal government to use force to collect tariff money. This was spearheaded by Andrew Jackson. It was similar to the Declaratory Act. Remember back during the Revolution when Great Britain declared they could do anything that they wanted against the colonies? The federal government declared its right to enact its power in any way it sees fit. Another example of the federal government gaining power. Indian Removal Act, Andrew Jackson offering American Indians to march west. In what was supposed to be voluntary, it became a forced migration where many American Indians died. So even though he offered them to move west, it wasn't an offer, it was a demand. It was supposed to make the American Indian tribes face less encroachment from the whites, but the whites kept moving west as if they were chasing them. It revealed the almost inevitable outcome that America would stretch to the Pacific. So even though it's supposed to be voluntary, you could just see the oppressment from the whites just increase and increase and increase, and it all really just foreshadowed the eventual takeover of the entire United States by the white people. 5 civilized tribes, active major tribes become more lawful and recognized. Their efforts to become more nationally respected failed, as the government could not keep their promises of legitimacy as ruled by the Supreme Court, although they became more culturally assimilated with Englishmen. So they tried to become more legitimized, but the government basically said, no, we're just not, and we're just going to keep on oppressing you. Trail of Tears, forced migration of Cherokees. It revealed the harshness and forced migration where many Native people died. This Trail of Tears was the major blemish on Andrew Jackson because it was pretty horrifying. Black Hawk War, war between resisting tribes and America. The American Indians were not strong enough to resist the American soldiers. Their survivors were forced to flee, highlighting yet another display of power from America over the natives. So you can see the Americans just kept on winning, I guess for lack of a better word, against the Native Americans. Bank War, Andrew Jackson vetoed the National Bank Charter. By Andrew Jackson vetoing the bank, he created a presidential power to veto a bill beyond the argument of constitutionality. He extended the power of the executive branch over the legislative and judicial branch. Anti-Masonic Party, third political party of the United States. They became prominent because they opposed secret societies and societies of privilege, which are involved in the two main political parties. So they were really trying to depose elitism, and the elitism had kind of infiltrated both the Democrat and the Whig parties. Nicholas Biddle, president of the United States Bank. His tactics of trying to manipulate the bank into securing an extended charter caused Jackson to bury the bank into the ground, ending it for good. So Biddle's kind of secretism just made Jackson mad, and not only did Jackson oppose the bank, he opposed Biddle, so he just really ran the bank into the ground. Specie circular, only metal money can buy federal land. This measure slowed the expansion of small private banks and eventually caused a financial crisis a year later. So this was trying to limit the power of paper money and banknotes, so you could only buy with gold and silver, which really hurt those small banks who didn't have large supplies of gold and silver. They just handed out paper money. Whig Party, prominent party that was anti-Jackson. They absorbed many groups who were turned away by Jackson's aggressive policies and appealed to all different types of people in America. They also exposed the Democratic Party of making themselves the defenders of the people instead of Jackson. So Jackson, you could see how he became really aggressive from the executive perspective, and he really alienated his grassroots movement that got him into the presidency. So the Whig Party stepped in and really absorbed those people. Martin Van Buren, president who came after Jackson. He was able to pass down many of Jackson's policies, including a depression, which made his reputation very bad. He had conflicts over Canada and Texas, and his rise to power angered other Democrats and anti-Masons. So Martin Van Buren's was to continue Jackson's legacy, but he kind of just ruined it. Panic of 1837, economic crash after Jackson and during Van Buren. It exposed the flawed banking policies that the Democrats supported and caused many Americans to struggle. It also pinned the Democrats and the Whigs on two separate sides of the economic policy aisle. One supporting, of course, the metal money, hard money, and soft money on the other side, which is those paper money with speculation. Stephen Austin, known as the father of Texas, he brought many American settlers to Texas, which made the Texas territory more American and different from Mexico. This led to the gradual separation of Texas and Mexico. So the ultimate decider of Texas separating from Mexico was those cultural differences, because a lot of Americans moved into Texas. Santa Anna, dictator of Mexico, he got rid of all Texan rights and raised an army to suppress any potential rebellion, which only stirred that Texan rebellion fervor further. Alamo / whatever battles between Mexico and the Texan rebellion. Alamo and Goliad inspired more people to join the fight, and San Jacinto was a decisive battle for Texas independence. Texas then sought to join the Union, which caused debates between North and South over slavery, because of course, when you bring a state in, you have to decide whether they're a slave state or a free state. Log cabins and hard cider, buzzwords supported the Whig campaign. These words that were meant to criticize William Henry Harrison inspired people to support him, and it got him elected. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter, and goodbye.